The reflecting pool has been a big success, and we've got a very the 340 million people in this country that are celebrating 250. We did have a few vandals, but all that's going to be repairable, and that'll all be fixed in the coming weeks as we go forward. The actual cuts that were made into the industrial liner, and that's been measured out, so that's just a fact that's what we've got to go back and repair.
There's a 350-foot gash?
Well, it's multiple gashes that add up to 350 feet across that. And again, some of this happened early on. There was where we've installed more cameras. I mean, we weren't expecting that we were going to have a small group of people that wanted to try to destroy effectively what is part of the Lincoln Memorial.
Okay. That was Interior Secretary Doug Burgum on ABC yesterday, doubling down on President Trump's claim that vandals have damaged a Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool amid a $16 million renovation. Burgum also claimed the landmark, which was closed for the July 4th fireworks display on Saturday, is crystal clear and free of algae. We should note there have been formal charges now against some of the people accused of vandalism of the reflecting pool. There's been no evidence whatsoever presented that it actually occurred. At least this has been such a boondoggle for Trump and really an on-the-nose metaphor for how things are going for his administration right now. It's a no-bid contract that went way over budget. It is,
something he shouldn't have even done in the first place.
Didn't need to touch it.
Why mess up the algae that was going already?
There was there's green. The water was green, and then now it's been being patrolled by federal law enforcement. I mean, it's just a disaster.
Well, I mean, if that's what you want your National Guard and your federal law enforcement doing, monitoring who's touching the reflecting pool now, if that's the level that we're at for this national security state apparatus that Trump has built, I guess we're there. It is what it is. What do you make of it?
I'm just surprised. And what's strange is the Burgum talked about now they've got all these cameras installed there. It's just like, well, show us the evidence of these people making repeated cuts for 350 feet, and they just don't, it seems, have any evidence. It's a strong, look, it's classic thing. It's distraction. It's blaming vandals, I guess blaming the far left, but the project has not worked.
No, and no evidence to support it. And President Trump's hopes for the July 4th 250 celebrations weekend did not quite pan out. Extreme heat in D.C., storms as well. Crowds not nearly what he anticipated, despite his defensiveness on Truth Social. Meanwhile, there's a new report that found that investors of the president's crypto coin largely suffered losses, even as Trump's financial disclosures revealed that he earned $1.4 billion from crypto-related ventures. The cryptocurrency analytics firm Nansen was able to trace transactions of Trump's meme coin through a digital ledger, or, a blockchain. The firm found that as of the end of last month, nearly 990,000 buyers of the meme coin have lost money. That's equal to 2 out of every 3 buyers. That makes for a total loss of $3.8 billion. As of Friday, the coin is trading at less than $2, down 97% from its peak of $75. But not everyone was a loser. About 500,000 buyers profited from the meme coin, making a total of $4 billion. Nansen found that this figure, quote, reflects a small number of early buyers capturing enormous gains while the broad retail majority absorbed the losses. And Trump's own disclosure forms released last week showed that he also made money, at least $635 million from the sale of his meme coin. Trump also co-founded a crypto startup with his sons called World Liberty Financial and reported earnings at least $525 million from token sales through that company. But Nansen's analysis of publicly traceable transactions related to World Liberty Financial found that 85% of those who invested with the company recorded losses, and they totaled $83 million. Meanwhile, former Republican governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, had this to say about Trump's financial disclosures.
He and his family believe they are entitled to this. This is an entitlement to them. They believe when they came back and won this election the second time, that gave them license, that the American people gave them license to essentially go and take whatever they could take over this period of time. And quite frankly, when you look at the scale of this, here's another thing apparently that Donald Trump learned from Vladimir Putin during his first term. This is Putin-esque type of corruption and self-enrichment. Every time he says one of those things, the ballroom won't cost anybody anything. Now we're talking about them wanting to move $1 billion to work on the ballroom. So, the American people are starting to catch up to this. You can feel it.
Governor Christie on ABC yesterday. And Allie, I mentioned the reflecting pool is an on-the-nose metaphor for the Trump administration. So's this meme coin debacle, where the vast majority of people, the supporters, Americans, probably many of whom, don't have a lot of extra money laying around, invested in this and lost, while Trump and a small set of his rich friends and family, it appears, made a whole lot of money.
I mean, look, it's great work if you can get it. In this instance, great if you can invest in something that you're one of the people who makes a buck off of. I think this, when I think about it from a political standpoint, David, is a clear underscoring of why the Democratic message going into the midterms is the haves and the have-nots, the people who the system works for and who can work it to their advantage, and the people like the regular American public who cannot, who are still worried about the cost of their groceries, the cost of their gasoline, even if prices are coming down. And I think that fits the domestic political moment. But then you pivot to some of the national security concerns that have been pervasive, frankly, since these things like the meme coins and others first came on the market. The questions about, are there foreign investors as part of this? Where is the transparency? And what are they paying money into for? And what are they getting for it? Which, of course, brings us back to the corruption that Governor Christie was talking about there. And so I wonder how you're making sense of this from a global landscape and from a national security perspective.
So, Ali, corruption's a powerful issue everywhere in the world. You think of Viktor Orban in Hungary. What really swept him from power, and remember, he was a White House favorite, was a perception throughout his country that he was corrupt, that he was self-dealing, that his friends were getting rich, and the average person in Hungary was not. And I think there's beginning to be a sense in the United States that people are being, in effect, taken for a ride here when you have a situation where the people issuing these Trump meme coins end up with billions, including the president and his family, and the people who buy them end up suffering 87% losses. It's obvious that there's some kind of a game being played on the average person, and that begins to make people angry. That this sense these people think they're better than we are. Yeah. They think they're getting away with something. We'll have to see how that plays out. Trump has been a magician in being able to turn his life as a billionaire somehow into his life as a billionaire populist, speaking for the average guy. But I sense from what I read and what I hear that there's growing anger about this sense that this is a corrupt, self-dealing administration that treats the public's property. Just look at all the stuff going on in the Capitol. Treats the White House, all these monuments as if they belong to the president, and people know they don't.